Port Chatham, Alaska, 1999. A ghost town rotting on the edge of the Pacific, fog choking the cannery ruins. Locals won't go near it. They say the place eats people, leaves nothing but screams in the trees. That's where the Army dropped us. A simple cold weather exercise, they said. My name's Sergeant Ben Harrison. They called me Ghost, not because I was fearless, just because I was the one who walked out when others didn't. And what I saw in Port Chatham, truth is, I shouldn't have walked out at all. So before we continue, please make sure to like and subscribe to support the channel and comment down below where you're watching from. Thanks. We were a small team, 3 bodies. Me, Corporal Miller, Private Ramirez docked to everyone because he was our medic. Rangers cycle recon teams through cold weather lanes every year. Navigation, survival, small unit moves, live out of your ruck in your head. Brass loves that kind of suffering. Our comms were cut down by design. 1 radio, short windows. Check in twice a day if the weather allowed. Otherwise, be clever, be quiet, be back on time. We flew in on a helo and hopped off on a shingle beach with driftwood big as telephone poles. Fog was low. Everything looked washed and forgot. The old cannery sat up the creek. Sheet metal bent and peeled. Boilers rusted open like mouths. Wood piles stacked with nails poking out at weird angles. Dock pilings stood like rotten teeth. Past the cannery, the forest thickened and swallowed the broken houses. We humped our gear to a flat by the ruins. Not much to it, 2 tents. Little cook setup, small fire ring we kept tight and smokeless. We ran lines to hang wet stuff. We pulled tarps low and dirtied them so they wouldn't light up if someone flew over. Habit. Even on a training lane, you keep your discipline. You keep the ghosts of old habits fed. Miller was the young one. Fresh but not green. He had that wiry energy the new guys get when they want to prove things. He cracked jokes to fill air. He talked quick when he was nervous. He'd smile hard. You can tell the nervous ones by how hard they smile. He did the work though. Kept his stuff squared away. Asked the right questions more than the wrong ones. I liked the kid. Doc was older than he looked. Quiet. Watchful. Came from forestry before he joined up. The woods were his church. He noticed things you and me step over. He didn't say much unless it mattered. When he talked, you shut up and listened. Me, I watched everything and made notes at night. The brass said the last cycle's section leader rushed the lanes and got a guy frostbit bad, fingers gone. I knew that leader, knew his face when he came back. That memory stayed with me. It kept my steps slower than usual. I wasn't losing anyone to show off speed. We ran the first day normal. Move. Map check. Pace count. Break. Hydrate. Chow. Move again. The forest there has this soaked feeling. Sitka spruce and hemlock. Moss thick as carpet. Everything's slick. You walk and the ground breathes back at you. We saw no bear sign, no scat, no tracks. That stuck out. You don't get that in coastal Alaska. Should have heard ravens squawking about our trash. Should have seen otters in the bay popping up like periscopes. Nothing. Like the whole valley held its breath. We made camp near the cannery ruins. Lines up. Tents down. Fire out of driftwood I'd snap to keep smoke minimal. Chow was boring. Coffee tasted like reheated bilge. It still worked. Warmth in the gut is a morale thing. I made the plan for the next day. We'd run a loop inland, east of the creek, climb a ridge, and come back on the far side. Check terrain reads. Check bearings. We'd test the radio from the high point. Punch out a check-in to our little window. That was the brief. Night hit early. In that latitude, the dark falls like someone throwing a blanket over your head. We didn't waste battery on our night vision unless we needed it. The fog was already thick. You could taste it. I ran one last circle around camp with the red lens. I listened. No wind through needles. No creek chatter. No gulls. Just our breathing. I slept with the rifle close. Habit. I remember thinking how quiet Alaska was. Not peaceful quiet. Not the hymn kind. The other kind. The courtroom right before a verdict. The way a hanger sounds when the last wrench stops. It crawled under the skin and set up shop. I told myself it was because I'd been overseas too long. Brain tuned to different noises. That's what I told myself. I fell asleep counting my men like prayer beads. 1, 2, and me. Check. The next morning started like any other in the field. Wet socks, wet boots. Grind your teeth and put them on anyway. Water likes your misery. It makes friends. We ate quick. Miller rifled his ruck for instant oatmeal and a packet of coffee. He shoved both down while staring at the tree line like it owed him money. "You know they got stories about this place, right?" he said around a mouthful. "Internet's full of it. People vanished out here. Whole town up and left. They call it the hairy man. Big bastard. Walks on two legs. Snatches people. Breaks trees like toothpicks. Smells like a dump fire." I told him to cut it out. Stories around every dead town. Wolves, weather, drunk fishermen lost in the fog. Old heads tell scary things to keep kids out of the woods. My voice sounded flat. I wanted the words to land. Stick to the plan. Don't fill your head with someone else's bad dreams. Doc took his time drinking. He watched the fog snag on the spruce. "We should be hearing ravens," he said. "Cormorants. Something." He pointed with his chin at the tide line. "No otter slides. No gull prints. Strange. Even for a haunted town." I didn't like that he said haunted out loud. Words can have weight. They can invite things in. Superstition, I know. But I've seen enough in other places to respect thumb rules. We moved anyway. Up the ridge, slow. The fog thinned to sheets that drifted and pooled. Lichens glowed where the light swung in. The ground gave under our boots like sponge. Every step had a hush to it, like the place had carpeted itself to smother sound. A couple hours in, I heard footsteps where there shouldn't be. I motioned down. We froze. The steps stopped too. I caught it again, faint, a weight shifting. Not deer, not four legs. Two, not close, not far. It moved when we moved. Stopped when we stopped. I scanned through the trees and saw nothing but lines of dark trunks and pale fog slipping like smoke. If you stare long enough out there, the woods build faces. Your brain draws eyes on every knot. You have to blink hard to reset what is real. I did that. Twice, probably a hunter, I said. Maybe we got some idiot trapper sharing the valley with us. Maybe it's nothing. Tree fall, branches moving, whatever. It sounded weak even to me. Nobody else nodded. We reached the ridge. The little high spot felt mean. Rocks slick with moss. Wind barely there. We set the radio and waited for our check-in window. The signal was garbage. The radio hissed like it had a chest cold. Doc held the antenna high and leaned into the open, hunting a clean bounce. I logged the failure. "Try tonight," I wrote. "Try from the beach." I didn't like failures, even when command forced them with their cute little rules. On the way down, we found the first odd thing. A stump with gouges cut into it in lines. Not axe marks, not clean. Just long, shallow scrapes, like something dragged a rake with too few teeth. There were footprints around the stump. Human. Kind of. Bare. Could have been. Edges not crisp. The ground didn't hold the shape clean. Could have been boots weathered out. Could have been my eyes. Doc squatted and didn't touch the marks. "Looks wrong," he said. "I can't tell you why. Just wrong." I told him to photograph it. He did. It didn't look right in the picture either. We made camp early. I didn't like the way the valley pressed in once the light started to go. We set a tighter perimeter. I had Miller put a tripline with bells at the north edge, even though it was a training lane and we were supposed to keep things low-key. Brass could shoot me later if they wanted. I wanted the bells. We ate hot chow, and I forced a joke about how at least we weren't sleeping in the trucks. Nobody smiled. Then we heard it. Not a knock, not a rustle. A small stone arcing through the fog to land just outside our circle. It hit with that little hollow clack rocks make on wet wood. Then another stone a few minutes later on the other side. Someone throwing? Something trying to see where we were? I stepped out with the rifle low. "If it's a prank, stop," I called. "You're in a training area." No reply. Just fog. We dragged ourselves to the bags. I laid there, eyes open, counting breaths. I heard footsteps once more. Slow, weighty, past the bells without a sound. That bothered me the most. The bells stayed quiet. I turned my head and saw the tent wall move, just a hair with a draft that shouldn't have been there. The smell came with it. Musk. Rot, wet fur, and something old that never saw light. I wanted to unzip and look. My hands didn't move. I lay there a long time staring at the ceiling fabric and listening to the blood in my own ears. Somewhere near dawn, I finally slept a few minutes, and it might have been worse than not sleeping at all. I grew up around mountains. They make their own weather. They make their own noises too. You learn what an avalanche sounds like, what a cougar sounds like when it screams, how a tree pops before it drops. You build a library in your head. Most things in the wild fit a shelf. Even if they scare you, you can file them. The sound that woke us that night didn't fit anything. It started thin, like a whistle from far off. Then it rose until it felt like it was trying to peel the meat off your skull. It ran up and down the scale, fast and mean, then dragged itself low and rumbled like a dying generator. It wasn't a wolf. I've heard wolves. It wasn't a bear. Bears huff and roar and snap their jaws. This had intent, hard to explain. It had the shape of language without the words. All three of us sat up at once. Nobody needed to say, "Get your rifle." We already had them. The scream came again, further left, somewhere up in the fog near the mountains. Then the woods broke into chaos. Not close, not our circle, far out, things running. You could hear little bodies in the understory, just crashing and fleeing like the ground had turned to fire. Wings flapped once, only once. Then it went quiet again. Quiet the way a blast wave makes quiet. Miller shook his head hard like he wanted to throw the sound out of his ears. "What the hell," he said. "What the absolute hell?" His voice had that tight rap to it that young guys get when their fear is louder than their pride. "Some kind of whale up the inlet," I said. I heard myself and hated it. Sound carries weird with fog. I didn't believe it. Doc didn't either. He said nothing. He stared at the tent wall like he could see through it. We sat there until our breath calmed. We waited for a third call. None came. The fog pressed in hard enough I could feel it on my tongue. Before dawn, we made a pot of coffee that tasted like anxiety. The fire felt weak. We ate quick in silence. When a man eats in quiet with other men, it's because talking would make something real. I kept checking my watch, like time could muscle the feeling away. We started normal tasks just to act normal. Run gear checks, dry socks above the coals, clean the pot. Mundane saves men. Routine digs them out. I sent Miller to refill water at the creek while Doc checked the lifelines. I took a slow perimeter again. On the far side of camp, along the little game trail we'd used to take dumps, I found something hanging off a sapling at shoulder height. A piece of birch bark cut into a coil, not a tree doing tree things. Stripped and twisted and left like a ribbon. No marks on the ground under it. No boot prints. The strip had been clean and deliberate. I stood there with it in my hand for a long time. I didn't like how it made me feel seen. I walked back with the bark and tossed it on the fire because I didn't want it looking at us. Doc watched me do it. He didn't say a word. That was worse than a lecture. Sometime after breakfast, I smelled that stench again. The rot. It came and went. Came from the east. The fog there looked thicker, like Noak stirred once and left. We did the thing soldiers do when they pretend the world still makes sense. Inventory. I had Miller lay his ammo out for a quick count. Doc checked the aid bag and talked through exposure drills. I made a note to adjust our movement plan. We'd hug the creek more, get quicker lines to the beach. We'd keep eyes near the north ridge where the scream came from. We'd test the radio at noon from the high ground. It felt better to write things down. Words on paper made the fog feel less like a throat pressed to your ear and more like weather. By full dark, I had convinced myself the scream was some odd mammal I hadn't heard before. The bark ribbon was some local prank hung by a lonely fisherman. The stones were falling from somewhere uphill. Gravity and nerves, this is how men survive. You stack bullshit between your fear and your brain and hope the pile holds. That night, I set the pistol inside the sleeping bag and the knife under my pillow. I woke anyway, somewhere after midnight, to the smell again, closer now, and the faintest sound. Like a breath at the tent wall. A slow inhale, a slower exhale. Not inches away, but not far either. The bells never chimed. I lay still and counted slow. 1 to 20. Started over. 1 to 20. Somewhere around the fourth set, the breath backed away and the smell went with it like a tide slinking down the beach. I waited. An hour. 2. I slept in fits for maybe 40 minutes before light. I woke to quiet and a cold that bit like a dog. I rolled out, reached for my boots, and saw that both tents across from me sat open at the flaps. That happens. Men take leaks. I called out, "Miller." "Doc." "Nothing." "Miller." Louder. "Doc." Nothing. I stood. The coffee pot from last night sat where we left it. 2 bowls with oats caked to the sides. Miller's spoon rested at the edge of the fire pit like he stood, planning to sit back down. Doc's ruck sat under the tarp with the flap open just enough to show the corner of his sleeping bag. Their rifles leaned against a log, both with slings looped neat. Not dumped. Not grabbed. Neat. My stomach tightened. The world got thin and sharp. There was no struggle, not even a scuff. Tents not torn. No prints digging at the doorways like someone panicked and dragged. No blood. But there was a smell. That same musk rot. Thick now. It moved in layers over the site, like it had come and gone and come back again. I forced my breathing steady and started with the basics. I checked both tents. Sleeping bags were warm. Bodies had been in them not long ago. No sign of a rush. Just absence. I called again. The trees kept my voice and did not return it. I did the thing every sergeant does when something goes sideways. I reached for the radio, checked the battery, turned the dial and prayed for a friendly hiss. Static came back in a tone I didn't like. I tried our window frequency anyway. Nothing. The radio felt like a toy. I found the first track a few yards outside the ring. Boot prints. Size I knew. Miller. The step was long. Longer than his usual. Regular. Like he'd been walking calm and not looking around. Doc's prints joined a little later. Same odd stride. They ran parallel, side by side, headed north into the woods. Then there were the others. I kneeled and my knees got wet and cold. There they were. The big ones. Human shape, but wrong. 18 inches from heel to toe. Maybe more. Width of a hand and then some. Deep. Deep like weight you feel in your knees when you pick it up. The prints went before the boot tracks. The boots followed them like train cars. They were not running, not scrambling, not resisting. They just went. Like a parade. Like a procession. I stood and felt the nausea hit. It came from nowhere. Not a stomach bug, not bad chow. It felt like a hum you can't hear but your bones can. It made my hands shake and put a film over my eyes. I swallowed it down. You cannot puke away dread. I should have punched my emergency plan right then. I should have gone to the beach, built a signal, and sat like a good piece of kit until someone came. That is what the book says. But there are things the book doesn't know. It doesn't know a corporal who talked about his girl's picture every night. It doesn't know a medic who ran needles into veins with that soft touch like he was apologizing. It doesn't know men who trust you because you told them to trust you. The book doesn't carry the weight you do when someone's mother will look you in the eyes later and ask if he was scared when he died. I followed. The tracks wound into the timber. The light dropped quick under the canopy. Fog sat in pockets and lifted in others. The big prince stayed steady. Long stride. Toes pointed forward. No stumble. It avoided the worst of the blowdown like it knew the trail better than anything alive. Every so often, one of the big prints landed on a rotten log and sunk to the knee. The depth it punched made me swallow again. The boot prints told a different story. They were too even. If you put a metronome on someone's steps, they looked like that. It was wrong. Human steps vary. We all have tells. A shorter stride after a climb. A toe drag on the right when we're tired. Nothing here. Just perfect soldier. Perfect march. Perfect trance. Half a mile in, the trail curved along a little bench. That's where the tree was. Sitka, not huge, but big enough it should have needed a chainsaw and a winch if you wanted it out. It lay ripped from the earth, not broken at the base. Uprooted. The root ball looked like torn muscle. Fresh dirt. Wet. Resin smell. I put a hand on it and felt the damp cold. In one split fiber, jammed deep, I saw it. A hair. I hate that word for it. Hair is what you pull from a shower drain. This was a thread of night. Long. Coarse, thick as fishing mono, dark brown to black. It had a sheen like sealskin. I stared until my eyes watered. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to put it in my pocket. I did both anyway. I wrapped it in a corner of my dry shirt and tucked it in a zip bag like it was a relic. I told myself evidence mattered. I told myself I wasn't stealing from a god. I kept moving. The nausea returned and hung like a heavy vest. I knew the word infrasound from some documentary I watched on a cheap couch once. The way big animals scare prey without moving. The way certain engines make a room feel haunted. I didn't think it then. Not clearly. It was a fog in my bones, a pressure behind my eyes. I tasted pennies. I tasted old fear. A little later, the tracks dropped into a shallow drainage with a trickle of water that ran clear over stones. The creek noise should have been nice. It wasn't. It seethed. Sound is weird when your head's wrong. At the edge of the stream, a space opened. Spruce backed away a few yards, a natural clearing where light came in with a sick color. There, dead center, sat a neat pile. Not trash, not a scatter. A pile built with hands. Miller's dog tags on top. His photo just under, folded once. His jacket patch cut clean like with a blade. A little smear of blood, bright and dark at once, the way human blood looks when it's fresh on fabric. The smear wasn't enough. If you've seen blood, you know. This was not enough for a wound. This was to talk to me. There was a piece of driftwood under the pile, like a tray to raise the things from the mud. The boot prints circled the pile and stopped like a drill movement. The big prints stopped facing it, then turned away. My throat went tight. I wanted to scream, not in rage, in refusal. Whoever left that knew I would find it, knew I would read it like a message. It felt like a finger tapping my forehead. Hard. Now you look. Now you feel this. I felt it. I tucked the tags and the photo in my chest pocket because some stupid part of me thought if I didn't, they'd get wet and blur and then they'd be gone like everything else. I felt watched. Not the way you feel on a bad street corner with eyes behind a curtain. This was older, bigger, the feeling prey has when it is allowed to know. You are a toy right now. You are an insect under glass. We can twist you, but we will not yet. That is what it felt like. It wasn't brave. It wasn't smart. It just was. I kept going. The trail moved away from the creek and climbed toward the north face. The fog thinned a hair and the light felt wronger, not better. My watch ticked, but time didn't move. The big prints led through places where a man would sidehill and struggle. This thing walked them proud and straight. A human would have needed to use hands in spots. No handprints here. It stepped high and clean, like a horse with training. After another ridgeline, the woods tapered to poles, fewer lower branches. The ground opened and the moss gave way to blueberry and devil's club, the kind of brush that chews shins. I pushed through and cursed the way a man curses when the cursing is a prayer by another name. Near dusk, the sound came back. Not the scream. Another thing. A low hammering, far off. Not like a woodpecker, not like an axe. Slower. Heavier. I wanted to call it knocking. But knocking is what you do at a door. This was a heartbeat turned loud on wood. It traveled under the skin of the forest and into me. I squatted and held. The nausea rolled harder. My hands tingled. The hair on my forearm stood up. The sound stopped. The stillness after felt worse. Anticipation is a crueler thing than contact. I kept the rifle up and moved. The trail looked obvious now. Like someone, or something, wanted a drunk man with one eye to follow it. I hated that too. I'm a man who hates being led. I stopped at a place where a big spruce had fallen long ago and rotted into a spongy backbone across the ground. The big prints went over the back with long steps. The boots followed. Between two prints on the log, a smear of mud like a heel had slipped. That slip looked human. Imperfect. Doc, Miller? I grabbed that tiny imperfection like a rope thrown to a drowning swimmer. The trance had a crack. If they slipped, they were in there trying. That made everything worse. Twilight in that country stretches in weird directions. It came and didn't. The air turned thinner. The temperature dropped the way a blade drops. The smell came again. Stronger now, not just rot. Something like musk, ammonia, old piss in a dirt floor shack. Something mammal, but wrong. The first glimpse came like a bad magic trick. A shape where there hadn't been one. A vertical stitch in the trees. broad across the shoulders, a head without a neck, more like head that grew from shoulders straight up, arm longer than it should be, hand hanging near the knee. The hand had fingers. You could see the length of them against the darker trunk behind, then not as the shape slipped back into fog and trunks. I didn't breathe for 3 whole beats. When the air came back, my chest wanted to make a sound. It came out like a whine before I strangled it. I raised the rifle. The shape weaned. It wasn't far. Not close enough to shoot and own that shot, but close enough my finger started to take slack on the trigger on its own. I didn't fire. I don't know why. Some animal part in me knew that shot would not be the first or last word. It would be the word that made the valley stand up and answer. And I did not want the valley talking out loud to me. It shifted again. It was a shadow inside shadows. It was big as the stories say. Bigger maybe. Height you feel more than measure. Height that makes you feel small while your brain does math wrong. It moved with a sureness I've only seen in apex things. Cats on a wall, old bulls in a leviathan herd. It didn't hurry. It didn't hide right. It did not care if I saw. That was its version of a grin. I could feel a sound in my chest, low, not in my ears, and made my sternum buzz, like standing too close to an engine. I swallowed and tasted copper again. The nausea crested. I dry heaved once and swallowed bile and hate at the same time. It let me see a shoulder this time, a slope of hair wet with fog. Not fur like a dog, not shag like a bear. Closer to human hair gone wild and thick. Wind teased it and the hair didn't lift the way dog hair does. It lay heavy. I snapped a photo like an idiot. Camera out, 2 clicks. Blurry. The fog made soup. The picture would show a darker smear and a lighter smear. But men do dumb things when they want proof of nightmares. It stepped back again and I did the thing I didn't want to do. I spoke. "Where are my men?" I said. My voice came out ugly. "Give them back." Silence swallowed the words. Not silence exactly. The small noises drowned. The small noises waited. The big thing in the trees breathed the way a cliff breathes when wind hits it. I knew then that it could move quicker than I could see. It was toying. It had done this with hunters, with loggers, with whatever else walked where it walked. It was showing me the way a cat shows a mouse where the walls are. Confrontation is a dumb word here. You don't confront the storm. You don't confront the dark. You survive it if you can, if it lets you. I backed away 3 steps, and it moved 2. I turned a little, and it turned 2. It walked a line off my flank like a sheepdog with a single sheep it hates and wants to drive. The boots turned with me on the ground like a memory burned into moss. "Fine," I said in my head because saying it out loud felt like giving it permission to be real. "Fine. You win." Sometimes the bravest thing is the ugliest. I pivoted in my guts and decided I was not finding them. They were in its house now. They were already gone. Dead or not dead, they were not mine to pull back anymore. I had been in houses like that in other countries. You know when the ground under your boots does not belong to you in any way that matters. You leave that ground or you pay a price that is written before you see the line. I stepped back again. The shape held. I turned slow and moved toward the creek. The shape slid with me until the trees thickened and the slope dropped. Then it vanished. Not poof, not magic, just not there between one breath and the next. The not there was worse. I made it to the creek and followed it downhill because water always tells you where the ocean is, and the ocean meant maybe a boat, maybe a fluke, maybe a thing with an engine and a horn, and a man on it with a thermos and a dumb hat who would nod like he'd seen this all before and hand me something hot. The light died fast. Fog turned to black. I kept the red lens on and off in pulses because constant light makes you visible, and no light makes your brain put faces in places. There are none. I kept the rifle up. I walked more by feel than by sight. The moss gave. The rock slipped. The creek splashed and laughed wrong. I heard it on my left. Parallel, never too close. Sometimes above on a bench, sometimes below on a game trail. A step that hit with more weight than any man I've ever patrolled with. Not stomping, just gravity and size. It kept pace with the laziness that told me I was not interesting enough to hurry. My guts stayed watery. My head felt full of bees. The sound in the chest rose and fell. My teeth ached. That is a thing I remember like a brand. My teeth hurting from a noise I could not hear. I tried the radio again once to bless myself with futility. Static answered like a dirty breath. I shut it off because the hiss felt like a signal flare to whatever drifted the tree line. At one point, the trees opened for a marsh flat. Muskeg. Soft ground that will take ankles and then knees if you don't watch your steps. There I saw them. Tall poles stuck in the muck ahead. At first I thought dead trees. Then I saw they were logs jammed upright and bound in pairs with some kind of vine at the top. Not a fence. Not a trap I knew. Just set, like markers. There were little things tied to the bind points. Feathers. No, not here. Bits of seaweed? Maybe. Strips of cloth? Could have been skin. I refused that thought and walked a smooth arc around the markers because everything in me told me they were not for me and never had been, and stepping through them would be a line I could not uncross. The fog shifted over the muskeg and cleared just enough for me to see farther. Far to my right, on a line of alder, I saw something like a face, not details. Just placement. If you've hunted, you know the feeling when the shape in the trees stops being a stump and becomes an elk. This wasn't that. This started as a face, stayed a face. Then the rest of it leaned around the alder. I saw an arm hang. I saw long fingers with a paler tone at the tips. Nails, claws. I could not tell. Then it leaned back and was gone. I kept walking. I didn't hurry. I kept walking. Somewhere in there I started talking. Not loud. Soft under the breath talk you do when you are alone and need the human noise to make your head remember your own shape. I said the names of everyone I'd lost in other places. I said the name of a man I shot once who needed shooting and still visits in rotten sleep. I said my own name once like I wanted to make sure I was still in it. I stumbled once on a root and my knee hit hard. I hissed and laid the rifle down a second to rub the kneecap. When I grabbed it again, the metal was cold in a way metal gets when a shade passes through a room in old stories. That is a dumb way to say it. I don't have better words. The rifle felt colder than it should have been for the air. Leaves moved, not wind. Heavy brush push. I spun half, expecting it at my throat. Nothing there. Just fog in the fold of the land. Then the smell slammed me hard enough I coughed. It was so strong it felt like a hand over the mouth. I spit and gagged and my eyes watered. The sound in my chest rose until my vision tunneled. The black came in from the sides like a camera trick, making the world into a circle with me in the middle. That is when I thought, this is a weapon. It is using it. It makes fear with its body. It makes fear with a note and a stink and darkness. And I am meat with a map and some pride and nothing else. I leaned against a tree and bent over and held the rifle with both hands and growled a thing I didn't plan. Enough. The sound cut, not all the way. Enough for me to breathe. I think it was because I amused it. That's what I believe now. A dog who stops pulling a leash because the thing at the other end squeaked in a new way and the dog wants to see what happens if it lets the leash slack. I took that slack and moved faster, not running. Never run. Predators love a runner. I moved like a man late for a train. I picked steps. I thought of tide lines and beaches I hadn't reached, and men in hooches somewhere warm who had no idea a piece of their world was snapping shut on me out here in a dead town that wasn't even a town anymore. At some point the land shifted under my boots and the smell of brine shouldered aside the musk. Tide. I angled that way and the trees thinned. I tripped at the last edge and slid 10 feet on my ass through gravel and kelp, and came to a stop among drift logs piled by storms older than me. The beach was a long scoop of black sand and pebble. The fog was less here, open. The ocean made noise, but it wasn't friendly. It rolled. It pounded. It hissed. It was still more alive than anything behind me. I turned back once. I didn't want to. Every nerve begged me not to look. I did anyway because I'm an idiot who needs the last hit of a bad thing to stick. The tree line stood like a row of witnesses. Something was there in the second line of trunks. It was darker than the dark, and wider than a door, and stiller than a cutout. It was looking at me the way a diver looks into deep water before rolling back in. Like it owned where I stood and every foot of ground under me until the seabed dropped and kept dropping. It didn't step out. It didn't need to. I got the message. It said go. I went. I moved along the beach to the old dock. Old pilings stood like rotten soldiers. The cannery's bones leaned over the water. The place had no sound but the sea and the little clink of chain inside a pipe somewhere when the swell lifted and dropped it. An old skiff lay half buried near the high tide line. Aluminum hull, dented and ugly. The kind of boat you find behind cabins out there, left to rot until you need it, and then you curse and kick it and call it good enough. I dug with a piece of driftwood until my hands bled from rubbing salt and sand into knuckle skin. I rolled it with a grunt and a prayer, and it came free. The interior had a pair of oars, one cracked but not fully through. A little bailing can sat under the middle bench like someone planned to come back and never did. I dragged the skiff to water. Every pull hurt my back in that pure way. Only a few kinds of pain do. The kind you remember later when you open a door and your shoulder pops and you think of a forgotten thing in a place far away, and for a second your hands smell like kelp and fear. I looked back once more before I shoved off. The thing stood there on the beach, maybe 30 yards down. Not where I expected. Closer. It had moved silent across pebble and wood, and the bells in my head that hear footfalls had not heard it. It stood tall, taller than the piling behind it. Its arms hung the way a man's arms hang when he is bored in a lime. Its head tilted a little. The eyes, I don't have a word for them that isn't a lie. They caught what light there was and gave it back wrong. Not glow, not shine. A color shift like oil on a puddle. I put the boat in the wash and jumped. My boots filled. The cold bit bone. I climbed and grabbed the oars and pulled. The skiff turned and slapped against a little chop, and the old metal complained in a voice the dead cannery knew well. I rowed like a man not rowing away from a thing but towards something else. A horizon. A line. A place with men and diesel and stupid jokes and aluminum coffee pots and the wrong sort of safety that still counts anyway. The shoreline slid past slow. The thing walked with me. Not hurrying. It just paced, keeping me in sight between the gray frames of fog and piling and leaning wall. It didn't come into the water. It stopped at the line where the waves licked the pebbles, and it stood like a statue someone had put there to scare a child who would not be scared because children have better saints than we do. For a moment I thought of lifting the rifle and firing a shot over its head. I wanted something I could call closure later. But the thing was bigger than bullets. It would make my shot into a toy it gave a dog, and the dog would chew it and look back at me like, "You done now?" I kept rowing. The swell carried me further. The thing got smaller. The fog wrapped it and unwrapped it like it was a gift to the valley that the valley took out just to look and then tucked back into a closet because it wasn't company time. One last time, when I thought I would finally lose sight, it stepped out onto a big drift log and stood full. It raised one arm. Slow. It did not wave. It pointed at me, then to the left where the mouth of the bay turned out to sea. Then it lowered the arm and stood and watched me until the fog ate the beach and the world became only water and gray, and the sound of my breath and the rattle of an old oarlock with too much play. That point was a message. I still don't know which one. Go that way. Do not come back. We took yours and can take you if we want. All of that lived in that single move. I rode where it pointed because I am superstitious, and because I wanted to be away from where I was, and because some part of me chose to obey. Maybe obedience saved me. Maybe it just let me live long enough to tell you. Maybe I was always going where it wanted me to go. A mouse on a table being pushed by a cup. The tide pulled me harder than my arms could push. The skiff rode up and down, and the shore vanished and reappeared, and then it didn't show again. Cold is a patient killer. It comes in through feet and wrists. It curls into your gut. It tells your brain to make poor choices gently. I huddled down and kept moving. Kept counting strokes until numbers became words, and the words became prayer. Sometime in the dark, a different shape came from the fog. A bigger one. A boat with a little cabin and a red light that bled into the world. It motored slow, cautious like a man who learned from a father who learned from a grandfather and knows a line of rock under him can open his belly for the crabs. A voice called. I didn't answer for a second because I was listening for other footsteps on a beach that wasn't there. Then I shouted. A farmer's hoarse sound that scooped my lungs into a busted pail and threw the echo at the boat. The light turned. The engine eased. A face leaned out the side. Hands grabbed the gunwale of my skiff and pulled me close. Another pair found my field jacket and hauled. I fell into diesel and fish and men's breath and a cramped space that felt like church pews in a flood. "Jesus, buddy," someone said. "Where'd you come from?" "Shore," I said. He laughed at that because people laugh when they feel a strange thing bump their boat and don't want to say the word strange. The skiff rode the swell, fog and gray. Then a workboat slid out of the soup little cabin, red deck light. The skipper eased close, tossed a line, and hauled me over the rail. Diesel, coffee, wet rope, human sounds. I shook so hard my teeth hurt. They dropped me in a harbor down the coast. Ambulance, warm blankets, questions. I gave name, unit, mission. I said my guys walked out with their rifles still leaning by the log. I said there were prints, ours, and something bigger headed north. I said there was a scream, a stink, and a kind of pressure in the chest that made thinking crooked. I kept it simple. No flourishes, just what happened. 2 days later, the brass showed. Butter bar with a notepad, top with quiet eyes, and a pair of plain clothes who never said who they were. They walked me through it again. I told the same story. No changes. No hero stuff. Just facts. The captain kept saying stick to the facts like I was telling ghost tales. Top didn't talk much. He just wrote down Doc's full name and Miller's, slow and careful, like he was afraid of breaking them. They sent a search team to Port Chatham, mixed crew, trackers, uniform, a ranger or two from the park side. They found camp, the ruins, the ridge. No prints, no bells. My lines were down and coiled like a neat hand had rolled them. No struggle, no bodies. They did find a cave just above the tide line. Symbols scratched in the stone. Spirals, eyes, hands. Some old, some fresh. The plainclothes studied those a long time while the rest waited in the fog. After that, doors closed. Files got quiet. The lane paperwork changed to weather canceled. Someone said aberration. Someone else said mass desertion. That one stuck. It filled a line on a form, and forms matter more than men when offices start talking to each other. They asked about drugs. No. They asked if I'd been under stress. I smiled at that. We all are. They asked if I was sure about what I saw. I told them sure wasn't the point. It happened. Their faces did the thing faces do when the answer doesn't fit. They handed me a medical discharge. Words like unstable and sleep disturbance sat on it like mold. Final talk, keep quiet. If I went public, they'd hang desertion and dereliction around my neck and kick the chair. I nodded. Not because they scared me. Because I was done being in rooms where air got thinner every minute. I kept 2 things. A single coarse hair, wrapped in cloth and sealed. And a photo of the footprint near the torn spruce, blurry but true enough if you know what you're seeing. I didn't send them to a lab. I don't need a man with a beard on a panel to tell me what my bones already know. Nights turn rough sometimes. The stink comes back from nowhere. That low hum rolls in like weather. I keep the pistol put away because waking with it in my lap is a bad road. Most mornings are fine. Coffee, quiet. Wort that doesn't ask me for stories. You want a name for it. Hairy man. Sasquatch. Old words older than ours. Pick one. What matters is how it moved, how it used the land, how it stepped my men out of their tents without a mark, walked them like cattle, and laid a message by the creek so I'd understand. This is not your place. They stamped mass desertion on the paper. Let them. Paper can't make fog lie, can't make a screen turn into a bird, can't shrink a print sunk heel deep in wet moss. Paper won't change the way it stood on the beach and pointed out to sea while I rode like a sinner. So here's the end, clean and short. A boat found me. The teams found nothing. The cave had marched nobody wants to explain. Command closed the book with the wrong word on the cover. I walked away with a hair, a blurred photo, and the knowledge that some valleys keep their own laws. If you ever go to Port Chatham, don't. If you do, bring respect and leave fast. If the woods go silent and the air turns heavy, do not call out. If something on the beach lifts an arm and points, row the way it tells you. And when you make shore, don't look back. So that's the end of our video. If you made it this far, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it's free. And if you want more terrifying encounters like this one, check out the other videos on screen right now. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there. See you soon.